なんとかです。というわけで始めます。Java はい。
This course is for students and professionals with minimal or no prior computing experience or formal training in programming or computer science. It's also for aspiring students who are either going back to school after some time away from academia or professionals who are beginning or advancing a career in information technology. Generally speaking, this course is an excellent introduction for those who want to learn the basics of programming and who have never programmed before. It's also a great refresher for people who have programmed before but who have not used that skill for some time. This course provides an introduction to the Java language and object-oriented programming, including an in-depth overview of Java syntax and how it differs from a language like Python. Students will learn how to write custom Java classes and methods, how to test their code using test-driven development and unit testing, and how to generate complete and relevant code documentation from inside of Eclipse. Topics include basic data structures like arrays and array lists, and overloading methods. In terms of the workload, this course will take about 5 to 6 hours per week for approximately 3 weeks. In addition to consuming the produced audio and video content, there will be graded programming assignments every week, regular quizzes to assess your comprehension of the course material, and coding exercises to get you comfortable with object-oriented programming concepts using Java.
Java でのオブジェクト。
This course is for students and professionals
いや、
using.
違う。いいだ。
Hi, my name is Brandon Krakowski, and I'm the instructor for this Programming Languages and Techniques course. For a bit of background, I started out as a musician and then worked in radio broadcasting and audio production. My experience in programming began with Adobe Flash, a tool I used to develop a live web conferencing platform for Big
フラ
Pharma.
ッシュっていうのは
I received my master's in computer and information technology from the University of Pennsylvania and worked as a programmer at Penn School of Design. I then worked as an application developer for Wharton Computing, working with faculty and staff to build technology to advance several student programs. Somewhere in the middle, I started my own company, Bleak LLC, doing programming and freelance application development for a variety of companies. I transitioned into data and analytics and became the research and education director at Wharton Customer Analytics, managing large-scale research projects with students and academic researchers from around the world. And most recently, I became a lecturer at Penn Engineering. A bit more about me: I play bass, I like my dog, and I'm a family man.
これはアメリカっぽいな。Python はやってない。で、この Python 系やってないけど、まあいいでしょう。シロバス。に、4時5にこたつクイズアサインメントがやる。ニットって今やった。どうすでは、やりましょう。Tips to 作詞。このコースで成功する。終わらせるには。4コース。まあ、全部のビデオを見て、ちゃんとモジュールを勉強して、ようと。テイクノートやんないな。 やったらいけんだろう。終了して。I also use an external tool to administer grade assignment called Codio. Codio is a tool that allows students to work in free cloud courses. Codio という開発環境を使ってですと。リプス入れてんだけど。とりあえず、次に行けば。このままやってみるしかないっていうこと。UX って、何しか書いてない。まあ実際にはローカルでクリプスとか予定だからあんまり関係ないかな。
In this course, you'll be submitting your programming assignments using a graded external tool called Codio. To get started, navigate to your assignment in Coursera. Download the zipped files for your assignment and follow along with the instructions on what to do. Once you're ready to submit, click that you accept Coursera's agreement and then click Open Tool. This will redirect you to the assignment in Codio. As you know, you may have issues with Safari or Internet Explorer. We recommend that you use Chrome as your browser to avoid issues.
クオテ、Y のトークビッツが火を吹くぜ。生放送クルーズさんの番組。クオテ、ホッタイもいじるな。生放送クルーズさんの番組。クオテ、こんにちは。生放送クルーズさんの番組。
Test your code before finally marking your submission as complete. To submit your assignment in Codio,
クオテ、英語読めません。生放送クルーズさんの番組。クオテ、だけ、に、ポップ、生放送クルーズさんの番組。クオテ、ケツの前も懐かしいね。生放送クルーズさんの番組。クルイセ、生放送クルーズが去っていきます。クオテ、焼肉、生放送クルーズさんの番組。
You will need to upload your own files to replace the template files. Alternatively, you could code directly in the existing template files instead of using a local IDE. If you are uploading your own files to replace the template files, you must first rename or delete the template files. Right-click on the template file and select either Rename or Delete. Be careful when deleting any files in Codio, as they may not be recoverable. To upload files, right-click on the Submit folder and select Upload. Once you have selected Upload, you can then choose to browse for files or simply drag and drop files from your local IDE. Notice that the files will upload immediately and appear in the file tree on the left. Once you are finished uploading all required files, click Close. Double-check that you placed your files within the Submit folder and open the files to check that they contain your code as expected. Please ensure that your files are named exactly as your course assignment instructions indicate. Note that these file names are case sensitive. Once you are satisfied that your files uploaded correctly, you can test your code in Codio. It is crucial that you test your code in Codio before submitting. If the code does not run in Codio, you will likely not score well on the assignment. To test your code, use both the Run Your Program and the Run Pre-Submission Tests option at the top of the screen. Use the drop-down arrow to toggle between these options. Note that some assignments may not have a Run Pre-Submission Tests option, dependent on the format of the assignment. Run pre-submission tests will run basic tests on your code to help evaluate how you are performing against the autograder. You will see feedback which tells you which tests you have passed and which tests you have failed. If you fail any tests, you can read the provided error message to see why you failed. You can then modify your code before testing again. Note that you can see your test results at both the top and the bottom of the screen. The stack trace in the middle of the screen provides more detail on the failed test cases. Please leave plenty of time before the assignment deadline for testing and revising your code. If you wrote any of your own unit tests for the assignment, you can run these using the Run Student JUnit Tests option. Note that the output will look similar to that of the pre-submission tests. Run Your Program will allow you to run your program in Codio's terminal. Make sure to check that your program runs as expected when in the Codio environment. Once you've finished testing and revising your program in Codio and are satisfied with your work, you can submit the assignment for grading. To submit, click Education at the top of the screen and then mark as completed. This will submit your assignment for final grading. If you have any questions about the submission process, ask your instructional staff or review the Submitting to Codio guide linked in each assignment in Coursera. In this course, you'll be submitting your programming assignments using a graded external tool called Codio.
コディを使えと。動画モジュール1インストラクション。
Welcome to the Java portion of this course. This module provides an introduction to the Java language and object-oriented programming. It includes an overview of Java syntax, in particular, how it differs from a language like Python. Topics will include variables and data types, loops and conditionals, printing to the console, scanning for user input, and code documentation. This module also explains the structure and inner workings of a Java class and teaches you how to define your own custom classes and methods.
モジュール1リソースはダウンロードしたから、次の項目へ。
First, should we forget about Python? In terms of the syntax, yes, mostly. But you should not forget about code reuse, modular programming, test-driven development, good style, or commenting your code. These concepts will remain important and apply to both Python and Java. Java and Python are similar in that they're both object-oriented programming languages. Conceptually, the languages are very similar, but the syntax is quite different. Java's syntax is much more verbose, both explicit and strict. Transitioning from Python to Java has a lot to do with learning the new syntax. Java and Python are also different in that Java is compiled and Python is interpreted. This allows Java to run much faster and more efficiently. It also allows your Java code to be inspected for all kinds of errors, including syntax errors, type errors, and non-existent functions.
コンパイラーだから、ある程度のエラーは出る。
When Java is compiled, it's converted to binary machine code or Java bytecode. This allows Java programs to be portable and run on different machines and operating systems. Compiled languages have many advantages over interpreted languages. When code is compiled, it's optimized under the hood. Since your program will be inspected for errors, many kinds of potential bugs will be caught early on. For example, using the same variable name twice. And your program will not run if it's not compiled. The IDE we'll be using for Java development, Eclipse, will compile your code for you on the fly as you save your work. It will also help you fix many problems in your code.
まあ、IDE を使えばいいよねっていう。
The TIOBE Programming Community Index is an indicator of the popularity of programming languages. It can be used to check whether your programming skills are up to date or to make a decision about what programming languages to use when starting new projects. The ratings are based on the number of skilled engineers worldwide, courses and third-party vendors, and calculated based on popular search engines. The index is updated once a month. Here are the top 10 programming languages from a recent snapshot of the TIOBE index. In terms of general highlights, Java is the most popular programming language, in first place. Python is in third place and is becoming more and more popular. Go to this URL for the most recent index. In order to use Java, you need to first install the Java Development Kit, or JDK. This is the package of tools for developing Java-based software. You'll also need the Java Runtime Environment, or JRE, which includes the Java Virtual Machine, or JVM. This is the environment for running Java applications. The JVM is what actually runs compiled Java bytecode. Go here to download and install the JDK, which includes the JRE and JVM.
これは、インストールも進んでるから、
To download and install the JDK, locate the main download link.
JDK13
Then
か。
download the latest version of the JDK for your OS.
うちのは、
Eclipse is one of the most popular IDEs for Java development. Another good one is IntelliJ. In this course,
IntelliJ.
we'll work with Eclipse, so please use it. Eclipse makes it very easy to write well-formatted Java with good style. Like Python's PyCharm, it has a ton of features. It compiles code on the fly, provides autocomplete suggestions, and fixes simple bugs. Overall, Eclipse greatly speeds up Java programming. Go here to download Eclipse. Scroll down to get the latest version, then click the link to download the correct version of the IDE for your OS. When you extract and run the Eclipse installer, choose Eclipse IDE for Java developers. When you launch Eclipse, you should pick the default workspace option, unless you have a good reason to change it. Click launch.
Mac だよな、ほんと。全部使ってるので、家入ってるので、これも大丈夫。
Eclipse stores and manages projects in the workspace. When you use Eclipse to create a project, a single program, it creates a directory with that name in your workspace. Within the project, you create an optional package or subdirectory. Finally, within the package, you create a class or a file. For the simplest program, you'll only need a single package or the default no package, and only one or very few classes. Java is object-oriented and class-based, which means you have to create at least one class to write a Java program.
これも分かってる。
Here's a very simple Java program. At the top, there's an optional package declaration. It should begin with a lowercase letter and use camel case, which means each word in the middle of the phrase begins with a capital letter. Then we have the class declaration. It should begin with a capital letter and also use camel case. The Java file will be named and saved in mypackage/myclass.java. Inside of the class definition, we have the main method, the starting point of any Java program. In Java, the name main is special and reserved for the main method. Like in Python, the main method in Java serves as the entry point to your program.
ここら辺は流せばいいって感じだな。
Here are some general rules for Java. Individual statements end in a semicolon. New lines don't mean anything in Java. This means you could have an entire program on one line, but obviously, this is bad style. For example, here's a statement, printing to the console. It ends with a semicolon. And here's another statement, defining a variable. It also ends with a semicolon. Indentation doesn't matter. Unlike Python, where it's required, indentation in Java is a matter of style. While it won't make your program fail the way it does in Python, you should not stop indenting your programs. Thankfully, Eclipse helps you easily take care of the formatting of your code. You can use these shortcuts in Eclipse. This fixes the format of your code. And this selects all of the code in the Java file and fixes the indentation. Java uses curly braces to surround code blocks, unlike Python, which uses a colon and indentation to indicate code blocks. For example, here's a conditional, and here's a function. For purposes of style, an opening brace should go at the end of a line, not on a line by itself.
一見これの概要とかやってるな。
You typically name variables using camel case, starting with a lowercase letter. Again, camel case means each word in the middle of the phrase begins with a capital letter. Every variable in Java has a predefined type, and you declare the type in front of the variable. Here, my int can only store an int. You must store that kind of data in the variable. For example, you can't do this and try to store a string in a variable defined as an int. Eclipse won't even let you compile your code. The type of a variable cannot be changed. This is because Java is statically typed. In Python, you can change variable types on the fly because it's dynamically typed. Here are some primitive or simple data types. Int is an integer. Float is a floating point number or decimal. Boolean is a true-false value. Here are some other primitive data types. A char is a single character. A double is a large and more precise floating point number. Byte, short, and long all refer to different integer sizes. Another data type is string, which is an object, not a primitive. It's used to store a character string. You might also come across class names like integer, boolean, or double. Don't worry about these for now. They're wrapper classes for the primitive data types. You can declare variables with initial values. Here we define a variable count of type int with an initial value of 0. And here we define a variable first name of type string with an initial value of Brandon. You can also declare variables without initial values. This declares a variable distance of type double without actually creating a double. And this declares a variable color of type string without actually creating a string. And then, of course, we can set the variables later in our code. Here we give the variable distance a double value, and we give the variable color a string value. In Java, there's a difference between a single character and a character string. Unlike Python, be careful about when you're using double quotes versus single quotes. To define a string, we use double quotes. Here, Brandon is a string. To define a char, use single quotes. Here, A is a char. Just like in Python, you can concatenate strings using the plus operator. Here we concatenate multiple strings and store the result in a string variable full name. Unlike Python, in Java, anything concatenated with a string is automatically converted to a string. For example, here we concatenate strings and numerical variables and store the result in a string variable, myResult. Note the difference with Python, where you have to cast non-strings to strings. There are two methods you can use for printing. This prints something and ends the line. And this prints something and doesn't end the line. So the next thing you print will go on the same line. These methods will print any one thing, but only one thing at a time. Of course, you can always concatenate strings with the plus operator.
While loops. 本当にどんどんいくな。
While loops in Java have a similar syntax to while loops in Python. Here's a simple while loop that iterates 10 times. I is initially set to 0. I must be less than 10 in order to enter the loop each time. And code in the loop manually increments I by 1 at the end of each loop. For loops in Java have a very different syntax than for loops in Python, but they are equivalent to iterating over a range. A for loop has three parts: setting the initial value, the condition for entering the loop, and the change in the loop variable that happens at the end of each loop. Here's a simple for loop that iterates 10 times. I is initially set to 0. I must be less than 10 in order to enter the loop each time, and I is incremented by 1 at the end of each loop, but you can't actually see it.
寝てた。Getting input ってのは使ってるんだ。
To get input from the user, first import the scanner class. Then create a scanner and assign it to a variable. Here, the name of the scanner is scan, and calling new scanner tells Java to make a new one. System.in tells Java that the scanner is to take input from the keyboard. To read in the next int, call the nextInt method of the scan object. To read in the next string, call the next method of the scan object. To read in the entire next line as a string, call the next line method of the scan object. Here's a single line comment using double slashes. Here's a block comment using /* and */. As a shortcut in Eclipse, you can type the following: /* and then hit enter. Eclipse will add a block comment and you can fill in the rest. You can add Java docs or Java documentation just before the definition of a variable, method, or class. This is the equivalent of a doc string inside of a Python function or class. As a shortcut, you can type the following right above a variable, method, or class name. Eclipse will add a JavaDoc block, and you can fill in the rest. In this JavaDoc, we describe the method as returning the sum of two given numbers. The first parameter, preceded by the param tag, is firstNum and is described as the first value to add. The second parameter, also preceded by the param tag, is secondNum and is described as the second value to add. Finally, the method returns a value, so the JavaDoc includes the return tag and describes the return value as the sum of values.
スティングコンプレスト。これをまあ、ざっと見ればいいだけか。こういうことをやるよねっていうやつ。じゃあ、プリンターズコンプレスト。全部見ればいいやって感じか。終了。まあ、飛ばして、これからだね。
To create a project in Java, in Eclipse, go to File, New, Java Project, and then provide a project name. Project names should be capitalized. You can use the default location, which is your workspace, and use the default JRE and project layout. Then click Next. Make sure Create Module Info.java file is unchecked. You can use the default output folder. Then click Finish. The project will appear in the Package Explorer on the left-hand side in the IDE.
で、コーディングデモンストレーション。
To create a Java class in your Java project, go to File, New, Class, and then provide a class name. Class names should be capitalized. Make sure public static void main is checked and uncheck inherited abstract methods. Click Finish. You'll see your class file open up. Inside of the class, you'll see the main method. The entry point of any Java program is in the main method. Let's start by printing to the console. So I'm going to use system.out.println, and then I'm going to provide something to print, hello world. And then I'm going to end the Java statement with a semicolon. Let's add a comment. Printing using SOPL, which is short for system.out.println. To run your Java program in Eclipse, go to Run, or you could click the Run button. You'll see the output in the console at the bottom of Eclipse.
Hello world で。まあそうだね。で、結構だから、
After
エクリプスのですない。シングル UI。はいか、デフォルト。出して、再開と。で、ここプロジェクトのインフォルダーが、モジュール率の iFirst でアップセットで完了と。で、MyFirst Java プロジェクト JRE、RC が デフォルトにさっきのパースコスティバが入ってる。で、これが実行してできるならば、できて、普通にできて、エンター。うん。エンター。かな。まあ、動いてるから、コーディング
Printing hello world, let's print a blank line. System.out.println with no argument, we'll print a blank line. Print a blank line. And then we're going to define some variables. I'm first going to add a multi-line comment. So I'm going to click /* return. Eclipse will automatically create a multi-line comment block. And I'll type defining variables. And I'm going to define an int. Int x, x is the name of the variable of type int, and set that to 5, followed by a semicolon to end the statement. Let's also define a double. Double y equals 5.0, semicolon. And then a Boolean. Boolean, we'll call it flag, and we'll set that to true. Now let's print the values of these variables. System.out.println will print the value of x. In Java, you can concatenate strings to non-strings. So let's concatenate the string x with the value of x, which is an int. And then we'll do the same for y. And we'll do the same for flag. Save, run my file, and I see my output here. X is 5, y is 5.0, and flag is true. Let's now look at strings versus characters. I'm going to add a multi-line comment, /* return. It adds the multi-line comment block for me. Strings and characters. In Java, use double quotes for strings and single quotes for chars. So let's define a string. String department equals CIT. This is a string. And then let's define a char. We'll call it letter, and we'll set that to the letter A, and that's a char. Anything concatenated to a string is converted to a string. So let's concatenate department with the integer 590, and we're going to store that in a string. We'll call it course. And let's concatenate letter with a string. So letter is a char. Concatenate that with an empty string, and we'll store that in a variable grade. So this is string with int, and this is char with string. Now let's create another variable of type string. We'll call it course information, and we'll set that to be the value of course concatenated with a string, concatenated with the value of grade, and then let's print it. System.out.println course information. Note that variables are typically named with camel casing. So let's run our code, and we can see the course information here, CIT 590A. Now let's do some math operations. Math operations. Let's define some variables. So we'll set double D to be 2 times x plus 10. And we'll set double Z to be 2 times y plus 5. And then let's print the values of those variables. So system.out.println, we'll print the value of D like that, and then we'll print system.out.println, the value of Z like that. And let's just add a blank line before that. Let's run our code. We see D is 20.0 and Z is 15.0. Now let's do some division. We'll start with division with ints. This uses integer division and ignores the remainder. If we run our code, we can see that x divided by 2 is 2. X, which is 5, divided by 2 is 2 with a remainder of 1. But because it uses integer division, it drops the remainder and we get 2. Now let's do division with floats. Division with floats. What happens when I divide x, which is 5, by 2.0 instead of 2? Let's see what happens. System.out.println. This time we're going to print the value of x divided by 2.0. I'll put that in parentheses. So x divided by 2.0. Let's run our code. And we can see that x divided by 2.0 is 2.5. So just by dividing by a float, we get a float, and it's what we would expect. 5 divided by 2.0 is 2.5. Now let's look at the power operation. Let's print the result of x to the power of 4. System.out.println. We're going to print x to the power of 4.
なるほど、わからん。
We're going to use the math class.
いやー、出てますよ。
Then there's a POW method.
ここ
We'll give
は
it the x for the first number, and then the second number is the exponent,
B で4乗する
4.
ってことですね。
And let's print that result. X to the power of 4 is 625.0. So math.pow returns a float. Now let's look at some string operated to
と
uppercase.
りあえず、
String operations. /* return
これはまさかプレアです。
string
エクリプ
operations.
スですね、英語なので。まあ、一緒ですけど。
Let's look at string concatenation
画面
again.
の方
So
は、
string
とりあえず
concatenation.
使っているコー
I'm going to
ド
create a
を
variable
見せてま
of
す。
type string. We'll call it full
フ
name,
ルネーム、
and I'll set it to be my first name concatenated with my middle name concatenated with my last
上
name.
にもつってるんだ。
Now, what if I want to convert my full name to uppercase? We can consider the different methods that are available to strings. So let's convert full name to uppercase. So let's create a new variable of type string. We'll call it full name upper, and we'll set that to be full name dot, and we can use the to uppercase method. If I run that, it's going to convert full name to uppercase and return a new string, which I'll store in the variable full name upper. So let's go ahead and say string method for converting to uppercase. Then let's print the name in uppercase, system.out.println. And then if I run my code, I can see that full name upper is my full name converted to uppercase.
そして、このブランドの普通でアッパーケースが全部大文字になっていると。
Let's look at conditionals and loops. Conditionals and loops. Let's create a conditional that checks if the value stored in the variable x is even. And we're going to use the modulus or percent operator. So, conditional checking if x is even using the modulus or percent operator. Let's first print the value of x, system.out.println. We'll print x. Let's also put a line break before that just to clean this up a little bit. So system.out.println with no argument, blank line. So we'll say if x mod 2 is equal to 0, meaning if we divide by 2 and there's no remainder, then we know x is even. System.out.println, we'll say x is even, else x is odd. System.out.println, x is odd. Then if we run the code, we can see x is 5 and 5 is odd. Now let's look at the Boolean operators. To do that, I'm going to create a few variables. We'll say double E equals 2.3, and we'll say double F equals 2.4, and double G equals 2.5. So we're going to look at Boolean operators. The first one we're going to look at is double ampersand or and. True only if both operands are true. So if E is greater than 2 and E is less than F, system.out.println, we can say that E is between 2 and F. Before running our code, let's just add a line break here, system.out.println with no argument, blank line. Now I'll run my code here. We'll see 2.3 is between 2 and 2.4. Now let's look at double vertical pipe, which means or. True if either operand is true. So we'll say if F is greater than E or F is greater than G, then we'll print system.out.println. We'll say F is greater than E or greater than G. So we know that one or the other has to be true. Either F is greater than E or F is greater than G. If one of these is true, this whole thing is true. Let's run our code. 2.4 is greater than 2.3. Now let's look at exclamation or not, which reverses the truth value of its one operand. So we'll say if G is not equal to 2.6, then we'll print system.out.print line G is not equal to 2.6. Let's run our code. 2.5 is not equal to 2.6. That's true. Let's look at while loops, which are very similar to while loops in Python. While loops. We'll create a variable int I equals 0. Then we'll say while I is less than 5, which it is initially, we'll print the current value of I inside of the loop, system.out.println I concatenated with the value of I itself. And then we're going to increment I inside of the loop. In Java, you can do I++ followed by a semicolon. This is the same as I equals I plus 1. Before we print this, let's go ahead and print a blank line. System.out.println with no argument. Again, blank line. And then let's go ahead and run our code. And we could see it prints the value of I, 0, then I is 1, then I is 2, then I is 3, then I is 4. As long as I is less than 5, it would keep running this. Once I is 5, it exits the loop. Now let's look at for loops. For loops. For loops are very different in Java as compared with Python. Let's first just print a blank line, system.out.println. So a for loop has 3 parts. Starts with for, and then we start by setting the initial value. So we'll say int k equals 0, followed by a semicolon. And then the second part is the condition for entering the loop. So as long as k is less than 10. And then the third part is the change in the loop variable. So we're going to increment k at the bottom of every loop. And then in this case, let's just print the current value of k inside of the loop. System.out.println. We'll say k concatenated with the value of k. If I run my code, I could see that it runs the for loop. It prints the current value of k inside of the loop here each time it runs. It increments k each time the loop runs. That it does here in the third part of the for loop. And then as long as k is less than 10, the loop will continue to run. Once it is 10, it exits the loop, and we're done.
Getting demonstration. Casting.
Let's talk about casting from one data type to run our code. The value is 1.1 by showing in Java. Casting. I'm going to start by showing you how to cast an int to a string. Cast int to string. I'm going to create a variable of type string. I'll call it int to string. And I'm going to cast the number 1 to a string. To do that, I'm going to use the integer class. From that class, I'm going to use the toString method. And as an argument, I'm going to pass 1. The toString method will cast the given int, in this case 1, to a string. And I'm going to store that in the variable int to string. If I run my code, I can see that it was successful. And now I have a string version of the number 1. Now, how do I cast a double to a string? Well, it's very similar. Cast double to string. Again, I'm going to create a variable of type string. I'll call it double to string, and I'm going to cast 1.1 to a string. To do that, I'm going to use the double class. Within that class, there's a toString method. I'll provide the argument, in this case, a double, 1.1, and the toString will return a string version of 1.1, and it'll store it in the variable double to string. If I run my code, I could see that it was successful, so I now have a string version of 1.1. So how do I know that these values were successfully casted? Well, I know because the data type of these variables is string, and my code worked, so I know that these variables, which are strings, are storing string versions of the given values. But just to prove my point, let's go ahead and print the values and the type of the values. So we'll start with int to string. We're going to print the values and type of values. Before we print any values, let's just print a blank line. System.out.println with no argument. That will be my blank line. And then I'm going to print into string. So say system.out.println into string, and then concatenated with that, I'm going to print the type of that variable, or the class as it's known in Java. So into string dot get class. This is the equivalent of Python's type method. Go ahead and run this, and I could see that the value is 1, and the class or the type is java.lang.string. So the type of the value is a string. And then I'm going to do the same thing for double to string. So I'll copy this, I'll paste it here. I'm going to print double to string, and then I'm going to print the class or the type of double to string. Save it, run my code. I can see that the value itself is 1.1, and the class or the type is java.lang.string. So the type of this value is a string. Now we're going to go the other way, and I'm going to show you how to cast a string to an int. Cast string to int. I'm going to start by creating a variable of type int. We'll call it string to int. And again, I'm going to use the integer class. And within that class, I'm going to use the parseInt method. I'm going to provide as an argument the string 1. ParseInt will parse the given string into an int, and I'll store that in the variable string to int. If I run my code, I could see that it was successful, and this now stores an int version of the given string. Now, what if I want to cast a string to a double? Well, it's very similar. Cast string to double. So we'll start by creating a variable of type double. We'll call it string to double. And in this case, I'm going to use the double class. And then within that class, I'm going to use the parse double method. And I'll provide the string that I want to parse to a double. In this case, 1.1 as a string. Parse double will parse the given string into a double, and we'll store it in this variable string to double. If I run my code, it was successful, and now I have a double version of the given string. Now let's print the values and the type of the values. Print values and type of values. Let's start with string to int. Printing the value itself is pretty easy. System.out.println string to int. If I go ahead and run my code, I can see that the value itself is 1. This is to be expected, but printing the type of that value is not as straightforward. String to int is a primitive value, so it's not an object, which means it doesn't have a getClass method. So first we need to cast to a generic object, then call the getClass method. So cast to object, then call getClass method. So we'll start with the system.out.println. and then I'm going to cast the primitive to an object. To do that, I can put object in parentheses, and then provide the primitive value that I want to cast, string to int, and then put this entire casted object in parentheses, then call the getClass method, and that should provide the type of the object. Run my code. I could see that the value is 1, and the class or the type is java.lang.integer, which is an int. Then we'll do the same thing for string to double. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this, paste it here. I'm going to first print the value stored in the variable string to double, and then I'm going to cast it to an object, call the getClass method that will provide the class or the type. Run our code. The value is 1.1, and the class or the type is java.lang.double, which is a double.
Oh.
Let's look at getting user input. To get input, I'm going to use the scanner class. So I'm going to create a new variable of type scanner. We'll call it scan. And then I'm going to create a new scanner, which is creating a new instance of that class scanner. And I'm going to get input from the keyboard, which is system.in. The scanner class requires an import in my class file. So I'm going to put my mouse over the red squiggly line. I'll let Eclipse take care of this for me, and I'll click Import Scanner from java.util. Make sure you click the right one. Now if I look at the top of my file, I can see that Eclipse put an import statement, import java.util.scanner. Now I can use that class in my program. The first thing we're going to do is ask the user to input a number. System.out.println, enter a number. And then I'm going to get the next input value as an int. So scan.nextInt, get the next value as an int. Change that to next int, and then store the result in a variable of type int. We'll call it myInt. Get next input as int. Then let's just print that number. So system.out.println, your number is myInt. Let's run our code. Enter a number, 34. Your number is 34. Now we're going to print the multiplication table up to 10 for myInt. Print the multiplication table up to 10 for myInt. To do that, I'm going to use a for loop, which has 3 parts. So for, first you initialize your variable, int t, we'll call it t, equals 1. Then you create the condition for entering the loop, t equals less than 11. And then you increment your value each time the loop runs. So t plus plus. Each time the loop runs, I'm going to print the result of t multiplied by myInt. So system.out.println, I'm going to print the value of t concatenated with the x character, concatenated with myInt, concatenated with a colon, and then concatenated with the multiplication itself. So t times myInt. Let's also put a line break here, system.out.println. Again, this is a blank line. Now if I run my code, I can see enter a number, 4, and I can see the multiplication table up to 10 for myInt. 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8, 3 times 4 is 12, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and prompt the user to enter a string. Enter a string. Let's go ahead and just print a blank line above that. Then I'm going to get the next input value as a string. So scan.next, just the next method, gets the next input as a string. Store that in a variable. String my string equals scan.next, get next input value as string. Then I'm going to print each character in my string separately. Print each char in my string separately. To do that, I'm going to use a for loop, which has 3 parts. For, and then you initialize your variable first, int u equals 0. And then the condition for entering the loop, as long as u is less than my string dot length, as long as u is less than the length of my string. And then I'm going to change u, I'm going to increment u within each iteration of the loop. And here I'm going to print the character at index u. Print char at index u. So system.out.println, I'm going to print my string, and then I'm going to get the character at the index u. Char at, this will actually return a char at index u, and print it. If I run my code, you can see enter a number. This is our first question. There's the multiplication table. Enter a string. Brandon. And then it prints each character at each location in the string. The last thing we want to do when we're done is close our scanner. Scan.close. You should always add Java docs to class, method, and variable definitions. We'll eventually learn that Java docs are useful for easily creating documentation for an entire program. This can be extremely helpful for other programmers who are reading or running your code. Let's go ahead and add Java docs to our program. Only a couple places. Here at the top for my class definition, /**, return. I'll let Eclipse create the Java doc block for me, and then I'll fill in the information. My first Java class. And then it auto-populates the author. That's me. Now let's add program.
というわけで、クイズと。でも、1週間前のやつだよ。それでアップルプレゼントの5.5、これはダブル。ホテルの、これコンパイルエラー。もっとプリミティブなのを教えて。コレクトイズシンタックス。いや、入れたコード、ビローに、ブルーが出る。If you want to both conditions being true. 両方ちょっとならand and. First condition which was mentioned, public static void mentioning character. If you want to define the first mentioning, first click to type quotation marks. じゃあはシングルコーテーション、シングルダブルコーテーションと。0ダッシュ0。What is used in Java sound code book? Java の基本だからこれまでそうと。一個間違えた。どこだああブルーンス。Java プログラミング、Java シンタックスと。
Everything in Java is object
まで
oriented.
は言ってやったので、7種はクイズを後にしましょう。いかん、眠くて頭が働いてね。でこれは今やったやつをここにこんな風に実際に実行していますってやつですね。というわけで、クリプスも動いてるし、さっきのクイズまで成功したので、今回はここまでにします。ではでは。
ディスコンネクト。